Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Lopez, EVP of Scripted Programming at Lifetime, and there's my fearless colleague, Tia Magini, who is the SVP of Scripted Programming at Lifetime. We are so excited about this year's Pitchfest in partnership with WrapWomen for the Power of Women Summit this year. We wanted to present the inaugural Pitchfest, inviting emerging female filmmakers to submit pitches for narrative feature films under the specific genre of women-themed thrillers. A slate of finalist pitches were chosen, and you can view them and their films on the Wrap's website during the Power of Women Summit. Of the finalists, one winner will be selected to have the opportunity to have the concept developed into a script by pairing the filmmaker with the screenwriter. The winner will be announced after the summit. As part of Pitchfest, we also wanted to come on today and share some general insight into our development process. A few things about Lifetime is just sort of like, I guess, more facts, just to give you the enormity of the movies that we do here at Lifetime. We do over 120 movies here at Lifetime, and most of these are run through various departments. Our department primarily handles about 60 of them. The rest of the movies come through acquisitions. So these are movies that are made at a certain budget or made in other territories and then just sold to us on concepts. Primarily, which is very appropriate for this meeting, is that a lot of those movies are thrillers. And as we look at material, we really have to focus on concept and casting. Those are the two big criterias for our thrillers, and actually primarily for any of our movies. I think we're going to get in deeper, and Tia will jump in on pitching, but just to give another example, so we're not doing, obviously we're talking about thrillers, but for Christmas movies, giving you a certain genre, we hear over 300 pitches for 10 movies. So imagine that is very specific to Christmas. Thrillers happen throughout the year. So the amount of pitches that come in that are concepts or one-liners or one-pages or a variety of things or scripts is the bulk is enormous. So our job, and we're very specific about it, is sort of what we need, how it fits into our schedule, and I think essentially, Tia, and correct me if I'm wrong, how does that balance out with the movies that are being picked up in acquisitions that we're not privy to as far as the development of any kind? So to start us off, I am going to turn it over to Tia to talk about the do's and don'ts of pitching.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about the do's and don'ts of pitching, because I was actually working on this with my 9-year-old niece this weekend as we were talking about the books that she was reading and how to describe them. And it really is sort of the same with pitching to us. It's telling us a great story, one that we're going to connect with and one that we're going to be excited about. I think first and foremost, and the thing that people sort of don't put as much priority on as they should, as they worry about like, well, should I say this or should I say that? I think the number one thing is to always start with doing your research. What is the company that you're looking for? What is the network that you're looking for actually programming? Like, if you come to me with the best Western pitch in the world, that is not helpful to me. It is really helpful if you've actually watched the network that you're pitching to. Within the last couple of years, there are a lot of people who pitch Lifetime movies to me that aren't movies we've made for 15 years. They're thinking about a Meredith Baxter Birney movie that we did in 1995, and that's not really what we're doing. And so I think the first thing is to really take a look at what the network is programming and making sure that what you're pitching is actually part of their programming slate. A lot of people will pitch to us a sort of, Ellen Hildebrandy women's story, Sisters on a Beach kind of movie. And that's great. And I love those books, but that's not actually what we program. So I think the first thing is to really do your homework, know what the company is looking for, and sort of tailor your pitch accordingly. I mean, obviously you should be pitching what you love and from your heart, but if you're pitching something that the network doesn't actually make, like, you're going to be wasting your time. So that's sort of the big first thing. And then, it really is, again, telling a story well. I mean, for me, it's about it's telling it quickly. That's not gonna lie, short, great pitches are always the best ones. But I think the key always is being able to state your thesis and your overview upfront. Tell me what genre it is. Tell me what your log line is. I know everybody is like log line, but it really, in terms of orienting the audience that you're pitching to what you're telling, the quicker you can do that, the better. Any pitch that starts where, well, there's this guy and he wakes up one morning and oh no, this is going to be terrible and take forever. Like the more you can really sum up what your story is going to be and why you're excited about it, in your first couple sentences, really sets the stage for the whole pitch. And then you can kind of back up. It's sort of about saying your thesis statement, your log line, and then if you're hooking the audience and their eyes light up a little and they're interested, then you kind of back up and you start telling them more. Then you tell them a paragraph about what it's going to be, and then if they're still interested, then you back up and start filling in the details more and more. I think if you dive into the details before you've kind of hooked them with what you're talking about, you've kind of lost people before you've began. So those are my greatest sort of do's and don'ts.
You know what I will add, because I think those are really great, is very often, because we're dealing in the thriller genre, and that isn't a new genre to any kind of storytelling. So you can actually give comparisons. You could say, this is very much like Sleeping with the Enemy. This is like Enough. This is like Unfaithful. Anything that has a thriller side to it, or a movie that you can point to say, this has a tone of, Get Out. It doesn't matter. It just sort of helps the listener, which is Tia or myself, to sort of go, oh, okay, now I'm there. I understand where they're headed. Now tell me what you're going to tell me. And the other thing is truly, and I'm a stickler with this, as Tia knows, is a title. It doesn't have to be the title that ends up on the movie, but it does have to be the title that engages you. And tells you what the movie is. So for instance, Tia just finished a movie called Single Black Female. You kind of know what that movie is. We just finished a movie called, it's actually, we're going to figure out the title. I particularly love this title it's about a woman who is disgruntled with her husband and ends up taking animals into a prison, and she falls in love with a prisoner, and they actually decide that she's going to get him to escape inside a dog crate. I call it the crate escape. It's not probably what it's going to be, but it gets your attention. So that's the other thing I would suggest.
Some of our most favorite titles in-house are ones that we know we're never going to be able to actually keep on the movie, but it does help us remember what they are and get everybody excited internally.
Crazy Stole My Baby.
Crazy Stole My Baby. That
Crazy
will not
Stole
be
My
the
Baby.
title.
But I do love that title.
We do enjoy it internally. What does Lifetime look for specifically in the projects filmmakers they partner with? Types of projects filmmakers, criterion or background of filmmaker, or accompanying assets with the pitch?
Well, I think I think for us, what we're looking for is not one-stop shopping. I mean, it doesn't have to be someone who comes in and says, I am the writer, producer, director, and financier. That is not important to us. What I think was really important to us is sort of, what are the strengths of this person coming in? So if the strengths of this person is a writer, and maybe they have directed, we're going to focus in on them as a writer. Maybe their strength is pitching, which, by the way, there are some people that are unbelievable in a room or on a Zoom pitching that cannot write at all. So I think what we look for is, okay, let us read your material, let us know that you're pitching. So if you're pitching a thriller, better that we read something that's not like a romantic comedy, because for thrillers, it's all in the execution. You know, thrillers have they're high concepts. So we're looking for someone who can do plotting. Maybe it's based on an IP of some sort so that we know that the plotting can happen. So the thriller and that whole suspense, we really look to see whether that particular filmmaker or writer has some basis of knowing this. Now, if you're a new writer, which many of the majority of that are coming in to pitch this are new writers, but they had to have completed a screenplay of some sort. So we're hoping that the screenplay that this person completed is in lockstep with the idea that they're pitching.
And similarly, I mean, great pitches come to us from so many different places. You know, what's kind of fun about this company, it's not like, oh, you have to come in with a senior showrunner connected with the director, connected with Jerry Bruckheimer. Like, no, we're excited to hear great ideas wherever they come from. Sometimes it's an actress that pitches us an idea. Sometimes it's somebody who read something in People magazine and saw an idea. So they come from all sorts of different places, which is good. But in terms of, I think, people that we're going to hire to you know, fulfill these roles, generally, yes, with the writer, it would be somebody who's got at least a script or a pilot under their belt and has some representation generally. A director, we'd be looking for somebody who had done maybe a short film and at least a pilot. It's sort of the bare minimum. And producers, you know, producers come to us from all sorts of different places. Again, we sometimes, if we find people we love, are happy to kind of give them their shot and train them up. You know, we've worked with a number of different actresses who wanted to become directors, and we've, you know, kind of coupled them with the right partners who could help them sort of achieve their goals. And we're happy to do that with emerging directors and producers as well.
I think
writers,
also,
you've got to have it on the page.
Yeah, I think ideas, we do a lot of self-generating ideas here at Lifetime. I would say probably 70-75% of the ideas that turn into movies are ideas that were generated internally. I mean, we really see ourselves as creators of content, not curators of content. So we do have a hands-on approach to working because we know our audience. I mean, I think with everything, you're serving your client. And our clients are millions of women who do not want their time wasted and are angry if you don't have a satisfying ending, if it doesn't feel like justice is served. It has to feel like at the end of those 2 hours that there's a completion in the storytelling. So, you know, I think that those are really highlights that we're hoping that our filmmakers or writers have done in some form to show that they can execute the idea.
And then our next question. For greenlit projects, typically how different is the final project from the initial pitch that was given? They're pretty similar. I mean, things change along the way, but generally the story, maybe not the way that we get there exactly. Like I've definitely had an outline that shifted completely, but the core of the story is still roughly the same. The sort of the big idea that was presented to us is still what we're there for.
And I think I think this is a really important note because it's almost harder to get something into development at Lifetime than it is to get it made. Because we do look at this and say, okay, I see this concept, this is the movie, this is when it needs to get delivered, this is when it's going to air, it's going to air in this strategy that we've created. And so if all of a sudden it turns out to be a movie that we're a thriller about dogs and it turns into a thriller about cats, we go, what? So we do really honor this, don't pivot. I mean, the executive is going to help you through the process, but if you've sold a certain movie to us, that's the movie that we're expecting to be delivered. And I think
things that might change are, oh, we're going to do it from the POV of this other character. Oh, we're going to do it with interstitials that do X, Y, Z. And then you see the script and you're like, that didn't work so great. Or, oh, maybe I'm going to do it as a did she or didn't she sort of story. And then by the end, we're surprised. And then maybe you have to pivot because that didn't really work so well, and it ends up being a more exciting story if you did really know who did it and you watched them as they went through all the machinations of chopping up that body and putting it in a suitcase or whatever it was. And so then you have to pivot a little bit. But I think that the core of the idea, that's what we bought, and that's what we're sort of banking on for us.
Yep.
And then the last question is, well, any words of advice to aspiring filmmakers? I want to be just a little bit specific before giving general advice in terms of things that we're looking for. Tanya was talking about it a little bit earlier in terms of the things that for us make a great Lifetime movie. And that's whether it's a true story or a thriller, but there are a handful of things that I have people sort of make sure that that we have all of these things. First, a story that has enough twists and turns to keep you busy for 2 hours. I mean, our thrillers are crazy, like a lot of crazy stuff happens in them. And so there are people who pitch us things all the time, like, oh, it's a story about a woman who is, stalked by her boyfriend who took over all. Anyway, real life stories that in real life, yes, that's crazy. But is it quite the level of the thrillers that we do, which are really pretty fun and bonkers? Like,
well, you know what? We have a visual. So our thrillers are a roller coaster, not a carousel. So don't be, it's not that horse going up and down. You've got to be screaming, going, oh my God, I can't believe it happened again. Oh my God, I can't believe it happened again. That's the roller coaster ride our audience comes to us for.
It's not, our audience doesn't come to us for movies that you're like, wow, how fascinating. What an interesting look at the something or other. I mean, those are great and I love them, but they're not for our audience. Like, we want to be really emotionally engaged. We want to go on the thrill ride. They want to have fun. It's escapist for sure. And it's emotionally satisfying rather than, well, I don't want to say it's not intellectually satisfying. I think they are. But you're looking for the fun escapism there. So a lot of twists and turns. Definitely want a female entry point on your stories. It doesn't mean that every lead character has to be female, but generally there is a woman's story that you're following, and there has to be a reason that answers the why on Lifetime question. If it's just a sort of interesting thriller, it could kind of go and be for anybody. So why is it specifically female focused? Why is it going to be for our audience in particular? Do we want an ending? No stories and no one ever found the body. Like, no, that's not exciting for us. We definitely want to know what happened. We want justice to be served. We want a strong, hopefully uplifting and inspiring ending. We like a sympathetic protagonist. There could definitely be people, ladies who go a little crazy over the course of the story, but you want to have somebody that you're rooting for. If it's just somebody who's doing bad things, you do sort of tune out after a while. And you also want the stories to be relatable. You do want a character that that you connect to, and you think, I think one of the things that really people like in our movies is what if that happened to me? What if that was my contractor?
What would I do?
What if that happened to my daughter? What if, and those I think are the ones that really, really connect with our audience the most. So those are just, as you're thinking about what makes a Lifetime movie, those are all elements, whether it's a true story or whether it's a thriller, I think is true for all of them.
And then I also, I go back to what we started this with is concept and casting. So you're going to you've written this great script and now you have to get somebody to play that role. In the lead role. So you got to make sure that there's a role for them to play. So it has to have an arc. There has to be some, the character that just goes along like this. It's going to be very difficult to find talent to play that because they want to be equally challenged. So I know these are a lot of things to think about, especially when people say, oh my God, I have the perfect Lifetime movie. Oh, by the way, never start a pitch like that at Lifetime. Because You don't.
It tells us instantly that you haven't watched our network in 20 years.
Exactly. So that's probably so that's like sort of the entry point. Exactly. So that's our tutorial, I guess, our quick tutorial that we will
this is helpful
to refine, but those are the pearls of wisdom of a Lifetime movie.
Thanks again to WrapWomen for partnering with us on Pitchfest. We are so proud of the hundreds of filmmakers that participated in this year's contest. Please go visit the Power Women Summit Marketplace to watch the finalists' pitches. We're honored to have such incredible voices share their stories with us.
Hi, everybody. I'm Samantha Barry, the editor-in-chief of Glamour, and welcome to Power Women Summit's How to Be a Boss. This is a very exciting panel. I want to be listening in to everything that these four women have to say to us. Let's meet our panelists. We have Cynthia Bailey, who's an entrepreneur, actor, and former star of Real Housewives of Atlanta. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us. We've got Christine Chu, who's a philanthropist and entrepreneur, as well as the producer and star of Netflix Bling Empire. Hi, Christine.
Hello.
Tracy Tudor is with us. She's an entrepreneur. You may recognize her from the 13th season of $1 Million Listing LA. And she's a real estate agent and an author. Hi, Tracy. How are you?
Hello. Nice to be here.
You too. And Julia, rounding up our four powerful women, Julia Hart, who's the co-owner and CEO of Elite World Group and star of My Unorthodox Life. Hi, Julia. How are you?
Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you, Sam.
Thank you so much. Well, let's get to it, because I think it's very interesting the trajectory the four of you guys have as being a boss, and there's some common themes there. But for our audience, let's start off and just give a sense of what you are the boss of. I'll start with you, Julia.
Well, as you said, I am the CEO, co-owner of Elite World Group, which is the first talent media conglomerate in the world, where we literally treat our talent as the media. I'm also the executive producer of My Unorthodox Life, and we have a fashion brand called E1972, and we just launched a shapewear company called Body by Heart and Lip.
And that's something I'm going to get back to in this conversation, because I think it's really interesting that four of you have all been really powerful in telling your narrative in this world of reality TV and in storytelling. Tracy, can you tell everybody what you're the boss of?
Yes, I am the boss of me at the Tracy Tudor team. I sell high-end real estate in Los Angeles. I've been doing it for 22 years. I'm also the author of a best-selling book called Fear is Just a Four-Letter Word. I just launched a wine brand that is a zero sugar wine called Unsweet.
And immediately, Tracy, this is I want some.
We haven't done that yet. I'm a female who supports other female entrepreneurs, and I'm really happy to be here.
Lovely to meet you. Cynthia, what are you the boss of?
I am the boss of all things Cynthia as well. So excited to be here. I am the CEO of the Bailey Agency School of Fashion, the Bailey Wine Cellar, the Bailey Event Space, CB by Or, Cynthia Bailey Eyewear. What am I forgetting? The Be Better Foundation. I also have a very amazing partnership with Seagram's Escapes. I have my own Peach Bellini signature cocktail, which is doing amazing. And I'm also the brand ambassador for the entire Seagram's Escapes line.
And I can't wait. We're going to talk about that later, about how you're encouraging people to buy Black-owned businesses, which I think
yes, I forgot about that. I also started last year minding my Black-owned business, Black-owned pop-up shops. And that is something that has been a passion of mine as a Black female entrepreneur, especially after the pandemic, just wanting to do my part, using my platform to help Black-owned businesses stay afloat.
Amazing. Christine, what are you the boss of?
My husband, Dr. Chu, and I developed Beverly Hills Plastic Surgery back in 2006, before we had a child, and it was our child. The practice had to have every element and things that we stand by and stand for. Back then, medicine was less concierge oriented and much more sterile feeling. And we wanted to transition aesthetic medicine into a more hospitality-based vibe and with concierge services. Everything from a Chanel-inspired lounge to customized music and customized menus and slippers and robes. That's commonplace now, but back then we definitely wanted it to feel much more luxurious, even when you're having needles injected into you. And yeah, Beverly Hills, our business was our first child. And we have spent many, many happy moments in that practice. And I remember in the very beginning, there was no task too big or too little for me. I was in the back washing dishes when necessary. I was in the front sweeping the floors if necessary. I served baklava, but I also handled all of the business logistics and enjoyed every moment of it. And we're very proud that Beverly Hills Plastic Surgery is now the largest plastic surgery practice on the West Coast.
Amazing, amazing. Well, what's really interesting about this group of women is, first of all, the industries that you span, right? We've got real estate and hospitality and fashion and beauty. But one of the things that you all have in common is a lot of that success is down to the IP, of who you are as a person. How hard is that, putting your name to everything as part of your business and your entrepreneurship? I'll start with you, Christine.
For me, in terms of plastic surgery, my husband is the star, and it is very important for him to be, involved in every aspect. But what we do have is a great partnership. Although we share the same last name, we do have very different roles within the practice and the business. And I think the success of our business is primarily due to each of us owning our own positions and our roles. While Dr. Chu, my husband, or Gabe, he manages over 40,000 plus patients. He manages and he performs the procedures and makes sure that their pre and post operative experience is obviously medically sound and enjoyable. But for me, I ensure and work on the expansion of our business, and particularly in adding on medical advancements and staying up to date on medical technologies and treatments to be able to provide the very best to our clients.
Amazing. And you're not the only person that is working with their husbands in their industry. Julia, you have a very, I suppose, for lots of the audience, not a typical route into talent management. How did that
don't come out of an ultra-Orthodox community and become CEOs of fashion brands? Shocking.
We'll pivot. No.
So, to me, of course, my story informs my past informs my present, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my first foray into the outside world, into the 21st century, was in my early 40s, as you know, and it was all about freedom. I had no freedom and my children had no freedom. And so the first order of business was claiming my freedom, ensuring that my children had the right and the capability and possibility to go to college, have a career, choose their own path in life, and not to be dependent on a man for something. And then I realized that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to create freedom for myself and my children. I want an army of financially independent women who own their destiny, who manage their career, who create longevity and a true voice. And so that, to me, you know, not taking freedom for granted has enabled me, because I don't see what I do as a job. I don't see this as a company. I see us on a mission. We are on a mission, and I'm not going to stop until the mission is done.
I love that. And talking about work environment, Tracy, that kind of blew me away. You were the only woman on $1 Million Listing LA. How's that dynamic for you?
You know, it's been exciting. Obviously, I came to the show in its 10th season, and we're on season 13 now. So for 9 years, it really did only exist as being a show about male real estate agents. So I'm honored to be a part of that, but I also obviously feel an enormous responsibility to represent women and myself in a way that supports other females sort of getting into the business, getting into their career, and being able to speak up for themselves in an environment that, you know, traditionally sort of shuts me up. I tend to have a big voice like that, and you know, so far it's served me well on the show, and I think that that voice has been appreciated by, you know, other female brokers around the country. And of course, it's sort of morphed into something I think that's way bigger than me, which is when I had the opportunity to meet Julia and, you know, look at houses together and spend some really great time together. And I do think it's a little bit of a bigger picture, and I didn't know that when I was getting into the show, for example. Obviously, as a female entrepreneur, I support women, but it's now bigger than that, and it's more important than that. And Cynthia mentioned it as well. I think we're all sort of recognizing that our place in this is probably far greater than we realized when we first started.
And when you talk about first starting, Cynthia, you started in the industry of fashion when you were 17. What was that experience like for you? And if have you had young aspiring models or actors come to you and ask for advice, teenagers?
Yes. Well, first part of the question, what was that experience like for me? I grew up with very humble beginnings in a small town in Alabama. So just even the thought of moving to New York City to pursue a modeling career was like not something that I even could have imagined, to be honest. So, you know, growing up in that way, I had to be somewhat of a dreamer to even be able to visualize something bigger for myself, a bigger picture for myself. And I was able to somehow do that. And I didn't have a lot of examples of people that went off and who had success in the entertainment industry around me. So, but that said, or the fashion industry. So for me, just that one decision led to everything else that happened in my life. Had I not gone to New York City to pursue a modeling career, I don't think I would have ended up on a reality show. None of those things would have happened. In terms of model hopefuls coming, you know, seeking my advice and opinion all the time, it is constant. And when I started the Bailey Agency School of Fashion, first of all, it was my first business. And for me, I think the key to success of any business is doing something that you actually have passion for. I knew I was an expert on the modeling industry. It was all I knew after, you know, being a successful model for more than 25, 30 years. And I felt an obligation to create a platform to pay it forward, to help other model hopefuls, you know, get into the industry, give them that information and that education, because as common as it is, people still don't know how to get into the modeling industry. It is crazy to me with so much access to information, and then also, you know, so much fraud out there in terms of the business. It is still something that I am really passionate about helping other people with.
And that's a really important topic. There's lots of illegitimate ways to get into the modeling that I think people, but being a source of not only representation for people, but also knowledge, I think is important. Christine, Cynthia talked about this a little bit, but the power in seeing people represented where you go. How important is that in your decision to join the Bling Empire and the stories that you're telling as an Asian woman?
As you ladies would probably also agree, showcasing your life on a global platform or national platform is very daunting and scary, and to show that vulnerability and to include your family is a decision that we didn't take lightly, but we knew that the impact the show would have would far outweigh the personal risks we would be taking. And that impact is normalizing Asian faces and voices and stories, celebrating Asian stories in a different way than what we've seen before on media, both big and small screens. It's, for me personally, as a first-generation Asian American mother, to offer an opportunity and hope to promote and pave a path where baby G, my son, and his generation could see diversity on the screens. And in addition to that, Bling Empire really was a Trojan horse that offered, hidden behind the bling and the glitz and the glamour and the lavish lifestyles, really gave us a platform, a global platform, to discuss stories that are otherwise kept very hush or are very stigmatized, stories that are difficult to discuss, things like infertility and surrogacy, even adoption, identity, sobriety, all of those really hard-hitting topics. We were able to, and spoiler alert, are able to deliver through Bling Empire, through this crazy cast of wide-ranging Asian Americans, ranging from Vietnamese to Japanese to Chinese, Taiwanese, Korean, you name it, Filipino. So this was an opportunity that we really are so grateful for and really could not give up.
Talk a lot on the Bling Empire. I think it's a really interesting part of yourself that you've shared about your struggles with fertility. Is there any part of your life that you're like, that's off limits for the world of reality TV? And this is a question I'm going to ask all of you, but for Christine, is there any part you're like, no, this is off limits?
Oh, my threshold for off limits have definitely been expanded with the team of very clever other producers involved. It's their jobs to kind of push those boundaries, but I will always stay true to who I am and try to tell stories in the most authentic way possible without compromising entertainment. One of the biggest struggles for me on a reality TV show is to play a character that is not always my normal, a more exaggerated persona. And sometimes I struggle with that, but I have to remind myself that the end goal is to effect change, positive change. And if that requires a more aggressive Christine Chu on television for fun without causing harm to others' lives or to the lives of their families, I think it's worthwhile.
Amazing. Cynthia, anything off limits? Or for the rest of you, Cynthia, I'll start with you. Is there anything that you're like, this is off limits? You've done Real Housewives, you've done, the latest is
the Ultimate Girls Trip.
The girls trip. What, anything off limit, or are you just like, I'm not getting involved in that?
You know what? I've been doing it for so long. I think maybe I had some limits in the beginning, but then, as a reality star, it's just easier to just show my reality already for the most part. I know I've always tried to protect my daughter for sure. She started the show with me when she was 8 years old. So Noelle was somewhat off limits, but she was a big part of my reality. So I had to show her, but as she started out very young. As she got older, I had to respect those boundaries with her, just in terms of whether or not she wanted to talk about, what was happening in school, if she was being bullied or whatever. Because what happens is, as mothers, we feel like these conversations are important to have with our children, but we don't always know how having those conversations publicly on a show is going to affect them in their real life. And I only have one regret out of 11 years of being on Housewives. And that one regret, and it's more of a lesson than a regret, but it's definitely something that I would not do again. And that was having production film my daughter go off to college. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. Like, no one had shown their kid go off to college. You know, this is going to be such a great example to other families who, you know, who they can watch Noelle, they can kind of see what it's going to be like for their kid. And you almost become like a producer in your own right, because you know, you have your storyline and then you want to help the show be great. So you're like, yeah, we can give them this and we can give them that. But what ended up happening was we really followed Noelle to college and her real life college experience. Her orientation was us showing up with like 10 people with cameras, and like, we just blew up her spot. I didn't think for a second how that was going to affect her. And what ended up happening was we made such a fiasco of her whole college. Just the first 3 days that she was there, we filmed for 3 days with her. You know, he showed me going to Bed Bath & Beyond, getting, you know, the comforters and, you know, all the things, making her room all cute. But because cameras were following us the whole time, when we left, and then we packed up in 3 days and was like, okay, bye, enjoy college. And it just created a lot of unwanted attention to her. You know, it automatically made people either gravitate to her because she was on TV that weren't really, who necessarily wouldn't have maybe wanted to be friends with her before, or just kind of negative attention. Like, who does she think she is? Like, coming, you know, it almost felt like she was trying to get special treatment, which was not what it was, because we were TV people coming to move her in. So it kind of backfired on me. It didn't end up working out for her. She stayed a year. She got very, she met some, you know, some interesting people, and they didn't end up having her best interest at heart, because I think they were fans and they just wanted to hang out with Noelle because, you know, their moms were fans of mine. We're like, oh yeah, you know, go be friends with Noelle. You know, we just saw Cynthia send her off to school, like, find Noelle. And then she didn't know who wanted to be friends for what reason. And then she just kind of started to isolate herself. And when I realized this was started to happen to Noelle, I ended up going to get her and just brought her back home, and we just kind of reset and rebooted. And now she's in LA and she's happy. She's doing her own thing. She's a very successful actress and an influencer now. We just went a whole nother direction. But I felt horrible because I didn't know how it would affect her. I didn't even think about it.
It's so interesting because I think you bring up a real important question, Cynthia, and it's something that I think journalists struggle with, storytellers struggle with, especially in the world of reality, is to be there and be an observer or be the journalist. How much are you changing the trajectory of the story by just being a witness to it? And that is a very interesting, it's just an interesting topic for all of you guys. Mm-hmm. Julia, your children are involved in your show. Is there anything that's off limits for the producers or for you?
So when it comes to my children, as Cynthia said, of course, family is first, right? So it's interesting because originally when we were filming season 1, I didn't even think Aaron would be on the show. I didn't even ask him, frankly, because I thought he's too young. Let him have his life. He's too young. And he's the one who came and said, wait, you didn't ask me to be on your show. I want to be on your show. So at that point, of course, I said, sure. But I think, you know, Cynthia put it so beautifully, Cynthia. You're always going to put your children first. And as mothers, of course, that's our responsibility. So to me, you know, when it comes to me, myself, you know, again, I'm on a mission and I'm a planner by definition, right? 8 years to escape my community. And it's not something that happened. You don't make change overnight. So whenever I get uncomfortable or think, oh my gosh, people in the street are going to know these things about me, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I say, Julia, stick to the mission. And that makes everything worthwhile. When it comes to my children, I leave it in their hands. I think if they're old enough to do this, they're old enough to make their own decisions. And I respect their boundaries. You know, there's certain things Batsheva did not want to talk about. we did not talk about them.
Tracy, your audience and fans of your show have seen you go through a divorce and find new love. You brought your boyfriend onto the show. How has that experience been for you in that sharing of your life again?
I mean, listen, I think anyone that does a show like any of the shows that we're all on understands this piece of it. And I think one thing that I think the fans of these shows are experiencing is like their version of our lives in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. They get to see it once a week, right? While the show is on. I was very protective of my girls, as was my ex-husband, when we got divorced, and we felt it was probably appropriate to just sort of reel back their involvement in the show. And it was for good reason. There was a lot of judgment coming my way for filing for divorce, both as a mother and as a wife. And the last thing I needed was for my girls to take that sort of experience. I didn't want anybody contacting them on social media. It was just something that I felt was really important to that time. Now, coming full circle, Juliet is about to be 16 years old. She's a little mini feminist in the making. And, I'm incredibly proud of her. She was ready to be on the show, and she sat both Jason and myself down, and she was nervous to talk to her daddy about it. But in truth, I said, you got to speak your truth. You are a young woman. You have the ability to make your own decisions. And if you want your dad to respect your decision, then you need to present a case that makes sense to him. And she did. And ultimately he agreed. And, she's appearing on the show with me this season and had a really good time doing it. I think there's a time and a place where you have to cut the cord from the cameras out of respect for your experience. But for the most part, I am who I am. Whether I'm on a podcast, a TV show, my kids are who they are. I'm all about a great show, but not at the risk of my kids or my family.
Want to just add one thing to what she said, because that's kind of like a trigger for me a little bit, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I can't say enough how much I agree with you. When it's a choice for them, it's a whole different situation. When they're young, Noelle was a part of my package. She was a part of my story. So she didn't have a choice then. And as soon as she became of an age where I could say, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to share this? Then it became better for the show and just for my relationship with her. Because, when the show's done, you have to have a good relationship with your children, with your family. And you don't want to have all this resentment because they've had to show their life, for so many years. And it wasn't really what they signed up for. It was what we signed up for. So.
Tracy, it sounds like you're also creating a mini boss in the making, where you're having your daughter present a case to her dad about what she wants to do. And I think for all of you, there must be many occasions as entrepreneurs, as women with your own businesses, where you've got to go into rooms that we don't see on camera and make your case for your business, whether that's investors, whether that's in collaborators. What have you learned? Because I know lots of people watching this, especially a lot of young, hopeful female entrepreneurs, will want to get those nuggets of like, what do you learn from going into those rooms? What's been your biggest lesson in making your case in those rooms that we don't see on camera necessarily? Cynthia, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'll say, I'll talk about my partnership with Seagram's Escapes. That partnership ended up, it just came to me as, hey, we would love to work with you. We'd love to create a signature cocktail with you. And I was like, oh, great. This is amazing. I like a cocktail. You guys have been around for a long time. This could be a win-win situation. But what happened was, when I went into that room, I think they had one idea of what it was going to be like to work with a celebrity reality star. And what they ended up falling in love with was the fact that I am a businesswoman. So as soon as we started talking about how that deal would be, I made it very clear that I needed to be a part of the creative. I needed to be a part of every single aspect of this drink. I didn't want to just sign my name on a contract and them create this drink and put my face on it and call it a day, because that's just not how I do business. So it was very important for me to not only make that partnership make sense and make it authentic, it was also important for me to try to keep that relationship for years. Like, I didn't want a one-off. I didn't want like, yeah, that's cool. Let's do this peach Bellini and whatever. I created it. I put my name on it. I went to the factories. I met the workers. I went to the lab. I did all the tastings, more carbonation, too sweet, too this. I was there for every part of it. My vision is actually on the box. My photo is on the box. It's the first time that they've done that. And that was all a part of my creative. And I knew that after working with Seagram's, because there's such a women based industry in terms of just supporting other women, I knew we were very aligned in that way. And I wanted a real relationship with them. So as time went on, I worked my butt off, and now I am the actual brand ambassador for all of the escapes, all of the Seagram escapes, which was never in the plan initially. So as a boss, as an entrepreneur, I think when you walk into those rooms that you're talking about, you have to have the vision and the work ethic to figure out how you can really leverage the relationship and the deal.
And it sounds like a great lesson in your story there is having that curiosity of every step of the way. You may not be the person designing the label, but you have input on it. You may be not the person logistically in charge of the supply chain, but having an understanding, because we're all talking about supply chains at the moment, what that looks like.
100%. Celebrities like, Instagram has created celebrities at this point. Influencers are celebrities. So celebrities kind of come a dime a dozen these days. So you have to position yourself as a boss and as a business person to figure out what else do you bring to the table with that celebrity. Are you willing to, just because you're a celebrity doesn't mean you want to work that hard. So I think the key to my success is showing up and doing the work, because that's what separates me from some of the other, celebrities that they may or may not have been interested in.
Christine, in the world of medicine, being a boss in that world is not easy, I can imagine. What are your biggest lessons?
I think that we don't give enough credit to our intuition. I think that a lot of times we feel that intuition is a fluffy, frou-frou, some kind of hunch. I think we downplay intuition when in actuality, intuition is the collection and the accumulation of all of our experiences, good and bad, of our background, of our knowledge, of the lessons we've learned, and we really need to act upon that wisely. So I have, and I say it even with hesitation, but, I really am making decisions based on intuition, which are founded on incredible experiences and knowledge. And in the world of plastic surgery, decisions would include partnerships with other practitioners, partnerships with medical technology firms, collaborations with the technology itself, even as simple as purchasing the technology or even staffing. And I would like to say that, my husband and I, we have given good, solid credibility to our collective intuitions and are very fortunate in having a successful business.
I couldn't agree more. God goes a long way, I think, in business, but also I think one of the lessons I've learned is not, if you're a little scared, it's okay. Being fearful is okay, because then you're leaning into something, maybe you're stretching into something, or it's a bit unknown. I think sometimes we're paralyzed by fear, and we mistake that for gut, when your instinct is telling you to do something. You're scared to do it, but yeah, do it.
Sometimes I think fear leads to curiosity, and that's a good thing too. And curiosity leads to more knowledge. So you can also act upon that fear in a positive way.
Completely.
I talk about this a lot in my book too. I think the one thing that we probably all have as collectively as women are at the phase in our life where that intuition is a little bit more present. And I think if I had to sort of speak to one thing for like the young female sort of little minis trying to get out there in the world of business and make something of themselves, they don't necessarily have that same sort of channel where it's like the voice on their shoulder that's like, I think he just said something inappropriate to me, or I don't feel good in this situation and I need to speak up. I feel like it's sort of like a muffled voice back there when you're 18, 19, 25, even 30. And I think you start to find that more and more. And I think for the young females out there, it's a little bit about practice. It's like anything in life. You start small. You start by raising your hand in a meeting, or asking for a meeting with a superior to sit down with them and go over your plans for the year, or whatever these little things that are a pinch out of your comfort zone to start to get a little more connected to that experience, so that more and more you start to kind of wake up and go, how else am I going to differentiate myself in a world full of incredibly talented, competitive young females out there? You gotta speak up, and that just requires sort of starting. It's baby steps. That would be one thing that I was thinking about as we were talking about sort of that gut that I think we all listen to now.
Interesting enough, and we've talked about this a lot in the Glamour offices and on other conversations, is I think sometimes the reluctance of Gen Z and young millennial girls and guys to actually pick up a phone and have a conversation. They're so used to like the world of DM that phone calls seem like a strange world for them. But in the world of business, being in face-to-face coffees, Tracy, a lot of real estate is really done in person. Are you finding that is a conversation you're having with some of the younger real estate people, that they're less about face-to-face and more about, I don't know, DMs?
Am I getting so old that I'm losing track of the generations? Like, what generation is my daughter? Are they Gen Z? I don't even know. But
what age is your daughter? She may be Gen
she's
Z.
16.
Yeah, she's Gen Z.
Okay. So my take is, I feel like the Gen Z kids are starting to get like a little bit away from it. I think they are making efforts to connect. It's the generation in front of them that just, they were taken by surprise by technology and media and social media being just this fuel to sort of keep them feeling alive and important. And I think that the younger generation, like my girls, while they love it, and don't get me wrong, they're on it, but I do feel that they crave that connection. And at least my daughters make an effort to have that, to pick up the phone, to, make those kind of connections and not just live here.
I would also like to answer your original question, if you don't mind. I just didn't want it to get lost, because I do think it's an important question that people ask all the time. So to answer your question as to what happens when you walk into a boardroom and, what lessons do you learn? I mean, for me, I think that honestly, it's been the most difficult, because I don't think people realize how much you rely on your reputation. Most people, I'm 50 years old. When people hit 50, they've had 30 years of being in the workforce, right? There are people who know them. There are people that can say, oh, I went to college with her. Oh, I was there at her first job. Oh, she's known for X or she's known for Y. I was a zero. Nobody knew me. There was no one who could point and say, oh, Julia's great at X, because I didn't even know what I was great at. And so what I've experienced in my career, in every step of my career, when I started my shoe brand, because people would say, okay, well, what's your experience in making shoes? Oh, none. Well, then why should we listen to you? What's your experience in making lingerie? What's your experience in? So every step that I have taken is something that I wasn't experienced in until I went and did it and got the experience, right? And so because I see forward, right, we started working on digital and avatars in 2019. Now Facebook came out and changed their names to Meta. So now everybody's talking about the metaverse. When I was talking about the metaverse in 2019, that's when I started creating the avatars. That's when I started virtualizing and digitizing all of our product. That's when I started transforming Elite World Group from a modeling agency into a media conglomerate. And when I was doing all those things, I literally got mocked constantly. People I had, when I was in La Perla, someone actually pat me on the head like this. Well, Julia, literally. So what I have found is, especially, okay, what's true for me is that because I didn't have that past, it made it all the more difficult to be taken seriously. And people love handing over my accomplishments, my work, everything that I've invented to some guy. Mm-hmm. Oh, she married a rich person. If I was sipping tea and eating bonbons, that's what you could say. But I worked 20-hour days. I transformed this company from a modeling agency into a media conglomerate. We are creating avatars out of people and working with the biggest brands in the world to make interactive, experiential shopping experiences where your favorite star will go shopping with you. Well, her avatar will. And every step of the way, I have been mocked and, not believed. And every time that has happened, there's this incredible woman who lived, her name was Gertrude Stein. And she's considered the mother of Impressionist art. I won't go into why, it'll take too many minutes. But she is the reason that people in the outside world got to be exposed to Impressionist art. And when people asked her, what was people's first reaction when they saw it? She said a phrase that I literally live by. They come to mock, but they stay to pray.
They come to mock. I think that's very interesting, because we all live in a world where, and we talked about this earlier, where you're putting yourself out there for a lot of personal reasons, right? You are putting yourself out there to represent you, your family, your business, but you're also putting yourself ultimately in the firing line. And I want to start with you, Julia, because you talked about those moments where somebody was patting you on the head. I can't imagine not all of you don't have, some kind of internet trolls that come for you. How do you handle that? And for the people listening in that have whatever version of that in their own life, whether that is, teenagers getting, bullied on DMs on Instagram, what's your advice to them? Because all four of you are in the firing line of that, being public facing figures.
So to me, I divide them into two categories. If it's something personal, I genuinely don't care. Meaning, you want to tell me, you're too old, you're too short, you're too skinny, you're too fat, you're too this, you're too that. With all joy. Everyone's allowed an opinion, and I have no issue. If you're going to mess with my mission, I'm coming for you. I'm coming.
Pistol this one.
What does that look like? So are you standing up for yourself? Like, I think this is this is something I think our audience would be really interested in. Like, how do you deal with, if they're, yes, I'm sure there's lots of personal attacks on Instagram, but if they're coming for your business mission, it's just shut up.
To me, again, it's all about the mission, right? So if you want to attack me and call me names, I literally don't care. I forgive you. I love you anyway. All it means when I see things like that is someone's life is unhappy, and all I should do is pray and wish that their life gets better, and so there's not anger in their heart.
I agree with Julia. I think, to a point, every once in a while, I'll engage someone negative on social media for the purpose of making a bigger point, which sometimes gets lost. And sometimes I'm like, yes, it did what it was intended to do. I mean, ultimately, I agree with Julia. I think the one thing that, you have to take in stride being on social media, whether you're a reality star or not, is that it's a very lonely place. And a lot of people go there that don't really have any place else to go. Right. And, it is a responsibility to sort of make sure that you're standing by your mission, is what Julia was talking about. And, my thing is, right now I'm recognizing, and I don't know how you girls are feeling about this, but I think part of the problem not only lies with sort of, women of impact, and celebrating female entrepreneurs and us having equal pay and all of these big issues. But beyond just that, where is that coming from? It's not just men. And so my thing, and what I'm noticing,
thank you, Tracy.
It's so women. I think we're holding ourselves back. And sometimes I went in on somebody the other day, they had a judgment about the show and my experience of it. And I just went in full tilt, and we started a DMing. And by the end of it, there was, an apology of sorts. But, I don't like women that, are attacking you for how you look, what you wear. And despite the fact that it really, I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway, but for the greater mission of us sort of coming out on top here as female successful entrepreneurs, it really bothers me on a major level that women tear each other down like that. Right. We're our biggest enemies.
Right. I agree 100%. I agree 100% with both of you ladies. And I think, you know, when you talk about inequalities when it comes to, you know, men versus women, it really hurts so much more when you actually have women coming for women. You know, we have come so far. The last person we want to have to defend ourselves to is another woman who's just trying to be great as well. So it is terrible. I did want to just jump in really quick before we wrap up about my social media experience as a reality star, because they really go in, the trolls really go in on the housewives. It's like open season for us. And I've signed up for it. I get it. I understand it. For me, the way that I deal with it is honestly, as an empath, as someone who I'm very affected by energy. If I read something that's super negative, super toxic, it does bother me. So I honestly made the decision because I'm not like I don't want to argue and go back with trolls, with people who I don't know, who don't care about me. I have no time or energy to do that. So, but some of my castmates do that, and I could never do that. So what works for me, honestly, is to just, if you're really offensive, I just block you. Like, I just don't even want you privy to my life. I don't want you to have access to me whatsoever. And it works, because then they circle back and they go, oh, you blocked me 2 years ago. I'm really sorry for whatever I did, whatever. These people we don't know these people on social media. They should not be able to have that much of an effect on what we're doing. And to I think Julia's point. What was I going to say? Oh, you said something that was so powerful. You said, oh, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, it was good. It was so good. This conversation has been so amazing. But to just wrap my part up with social media, I think that life is too short. Our time is so precious. As someone who's been on a drama-based high conflict reality show for so many years, it just feels so good to create peace for my life, to create other options for my life. And social media in a negative way, in any way, for me, is just not an option. I don't entertain it. I mute people. I block people. I don't give them the dignity of a response if it's not deserving, and that's it. I just move on. I don't care. Oh, that's what you said. If it's personal, you can say, I'm ugly, I'm fat, I've gained weight, I've lost weight, I'm too skinny, my man doesn't love me. I don't care what you think about my personal life at all. What I really don't. Can I say give a shit? I don't give a shit. Okay. Business wise, you come from my business, then you may get somewhat of a response, or I may make some kind of statement, because I have to protect that. My children, you come for Noel, then that is probably the only time I will respond to a troll, to be honest. All bets are off if it comes to my child.
I feel exactly the same way. And like, if people try, I've had, and as you said, and you said it so well, Cynthia, it's such an important point. And Tracy, you made it as well. When I left the community, and of course, I'm very careful, I don't say Judaism, because I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think it's endemic in any fundamentalist culture. But what was most painful is having not just men attack me, which I expected, but the Phyllis Schlaflys of the world, right? The people who want to keep status quo, who think that women's place is in the home, coming and, denigrating my story, making me try to defend what happened to me. So having defend what happened to my life makes it feel as if I'm reliving the trauma all over again, and is extremely painful to me. But the worst part of it, as you said, it's when it's a woman. That's when it hurts the most. And to me, I don't respond to anything negative. If you wanted my attention, you have to come in a positive way. If you're going to attack me, I'm not going to notice you. But when it goes into the public forum and it's, oh, it wasn't so bad there. She watched movies eventually. She got to ride a bike eventually. That's when I'm going to respond, because it doesn't just denigrate what happened to me, it doesn't just harm my experience. It ensures that the next person who wants to leave, the next person who wants to share her story will be just more afraid to do so. So if it's going to mess with my mission to empower women, that's when I'm going to respond. And I'm going to respond with the full force I have at my disposal.
And we're definitely not in this panel about women going after women. So I'm going to ask one final question about your advice for the other female bosses that might be listening in. But first, Christine, can I ask you what your experience with social media, or if you have a tactic of how to deal with the trolls? And then I'm going to come back for a final question with all of you guys on how what your message to the women bosses out there.
I think we owe it to ourselves to protect our space. And it took me a long time. And I think with each decade, you learn to, in a way, care less, but care more about things that matter and people who matter, and to edit. My mom has always taught me to not take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. So these internet trolls,
I love that. Oh, I gotta take that one.
So I really don't give it space, and I am also an empath, so it does affect me if I pay attention to it. In fact, when Bling Empire first came out, my persona was, a little bit more on the aggressive side, and so I did get a lot of hate on the internet, and we actually did, and we found it rather suspicious because the hate was coming from. It had a very, it had the same verbiage and the same tonality and kind of the same messaging. And so we did hire a digital forensics company to trace. And as it turns out, the majority of that hate stems from a place in the Valley from 5 IP accounts, IP addresses. And they're not even real. They're not real people. So we just have to remember that we owe it to our own sanity to protect it.
So final quick fire round, because we are about lifting up women. What is your message for the other female bosses tuning in today? I'll start with you, Julia.
So to your point, those voices, the negative voices, are very far and few between. What we need to remember, because of course, negative voices are the loudest. What we need to remember is it's 99.9% of women help one another, work together, are the true sisterhood. And so my advice is to do exactly that, to help each other, to lift each other up, to realize that the more connected we are and the more unified we are, the stronger we are. And I always say this, I know it sounds kind of goofy, talk to yourself in the mirror. I swear to God it works, because there are so many voices that are going to accost you every day and tell you what you can't do and what you can't be and what you can't have. And you have to counterbalance and counteract those voices with your own. You've got to say it out loud. You've got to wake up every morning and you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I can. I can, I can, I can. Because you've got to drown out all of the you can'ts.
I love that verbal manifestation. Tracy, what's your message for all the bad bosses out there tuning in today?
I get that question a lot, and it changes depending on my mood. But for me right now, I think it's important for young females starting off in business to never say like they can't do it. I won't say that it doesn't come with hard work. I think a lot of younger women out there that are, coming into their own, didn't have the traditional upbringing that potentially all of us had, and I think it's definitely on social media and media altogether that, everybody's just an overnight success. No one is an overnight success. None of us became as successful as we are because we landed on a reality show one day and got 2 million followers. That just isn't the way life works. It's all a progression. So if you put 100% of your heart into it and you wake up every day with a mission in mind and a goal, and you keep working towards that, it just gets better and better, and have people and women that you admire and respect, that you relate to, not some sort of 90-year-old that grew up at a different time, but women that are from different cultures. That's why I love this panel, that you can relate to, understand, and listen and follow. That's my 2 cents.
I love that. Cynthia, what's your advice?
My advice is what has worked for me from the beginning and still works for me now is mindset, positive. What is the word? I'm drawing a blank now, but manifestation. Yes. Positive affirmation. Thank you. I've been like on a press tour, like on fumes now. Positive affirmation and manifestation. I've always believed in myself, and I've always tried to have a positive attitude. And when you have a positive attitude about life and about the things that you're trying to accomplish, the universe pulls people in that respond to that positivity. And then that's when you can connect and network with other people with the same mindset. Like we actually gravitate toward each other, people that are trying to do great things. Like I'm so attracted to other boss women because they're like me. I'm not, attracted to women who just want to get their nails done and that's it. And, figure out what new bag they're going to buy. I like all of those things as well, but I'm pulled to women who are positive and boss women, women that I look up to, they have a very healthy, positive mindset. Like they really are just very focused on making it work, like balancing work and family and all of those things. That's what I love. And that's what I constantly try to achieve. So manifest it. Like every day, say to yourself, today, something great is going to happen to me. Today, I'm going to meet somebody that's going to change my life. Today, I'm going to do 5 things that could turn my life around. I'm going to actively say that and do it. And stay positive because negativity is sabotage. What happens when you're negative, you pull in negative people. Like positive people don't respond to negative people. We just can't, it's not in we can't do it. Like that shuts us down. Oh, no. I can feel a negative person coming a mile away and I can feel a positive person. I can feel good energy just as much as I can feel bad energy. So read the room, respond to people that are giving off the vibes that you need, that you relate to, that you want, that you need to, to walk towards your purpose.
I love that. Affirmations and surrounding yourself with people, not only that, as I say,
100%
you admire. And finally, Christine, what is your message for all the bosses out there or the wannabe bosses that are tuning in?
Well, in addition to all of the great advice that we've already heard, I just got off a flight and it reminds me, and my mom also very frequently reminded me that you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. If you don't take care of yourself first, you are unable to take care of your loved ones, of your businesses, of your passions, of all of your projects. So finding that balance, and not only balance, but loving yourself and finding your happiness. It's silly and cheesy, but it works. I have a happy journal and I jot down things, people, places, that bring joy to my life. And I try to frequent those places and experiences and interact more with those people and to kind of fill up my pot of happiness. So remember to take care of that.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for such an amazing conversation. I could have talked to you guys for hours. And also to all of you, the audience, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the rest of Power Women Summit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Bennett, Assistant Managing Editor for News at The Wrap, and welcome to the Power Women Summit's Focus on Inclusion, business, and brands behind the scenes. Let's meet our esteemed panelists. First up, we have Ivy Kagan-Bierman. She is the chair of entertainment labor at Loeb & Loeb Law Firm. Next, we have Malia Arrington. She is the executive director of the Hollywood Commission. Malia. Okay. We also have Daisy O'Shea. She is the chief people officer of Vice Media. Hello. And we have Gil Robertson. He is the co-founder and president of the African American Film Critics Association. So thank you all so much for being here, and let's get started. What is the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace? How does it make a difference?
We live in the world, and the world is made up of many wonderful different people. And so those voices, from a business standpoint, should be reflected. They're important from a business standpoint because you want to, in order to reach those audiences, you need to understand them. And by understanding them, you can, market appropriately to them, you can message appropriately to them. And thus that has an impact on your bottom line.
Ivy, would you agree?
I totally agree. And I wanted to emphasize inclusion because for so long we talked about diversity without talking very much about inclusion. And the reality is you can bring in all kinds of people into your workplace, but if it is not an inclusive workplace, you've only done half the work. And the people that you've brought into your workplace are not going to feel comfortable, and you're probably not going to be able to retain them. So I think now inclusion has become as important as the diversity itself.
Well said. Daisy, what has your company done to increase inclusion and diversity?
Oh goodness, what haven't we done? I joined Vice Media Group about 1.5 years ago. And a lot of what people haven't known about Vice Media is that it's been undergoing a transformation in the last 3 years or so since Nancy Dubuque became our CEO. And Nancy has been particularly focused, and I love that you brought up the concept of inclusion, not just diversity, on the culture of the organization. Because our work at Vice is driven first and foremost by bringing new voices to the table. And in order to do that, we have to be a company that mirrors the diversity of the world that we want to shine a light on every day. And so since I have joined, again, 1.5 years ago, and I joined in May of 2020, on May 11th, 2 weeks before George Floyd was murdered, and 2 weeks before the entire world began talking about the topics that now we talk about almost on a weekly basis. And it was really important for us and my leadership and my team to ensure that instead of being reactive, that we really take a moment to be responsive to the moment and what it meant to our culture and our organization. And so we have spent the last 1.5 years really deeply listening to our employees, because while listening alone is not going to solve for it, it's really critical to empower employee voices in the work that we do. And so we've done what every company has done from a people process in terms of recruitment, retention, development, promotion, all of those standard processes, which we can talk about later, we did deep interrogation in terms of our processes. So I spend a lot of time talking to our teams about how inequality happens in organizations, which is when processes don't fit and support minority employees, but really are there defined to support the ongoing majority employees. And then we spent a lot of time really digging into what those systems look like, how they became what they became in the first place, and how do we change them going forward. So we approach it from a 4-stage process: people, systems, standards, which is what we call our work, and culture. Most organizations call it workplace, and marketplace. It's the same thing, but every company has their own lingo. And so our lingo is people, culture, systems, and standards.
It's interesting that you mentioned recruiting, because I've heard this time and time over the years. We just can't find, and I hate to say it, but qualified women or qualified African Americans or Latinos. So anyone jump in, like, how do we get around that and dispel that myth?
We need to start looking a little bit more at what we think our historical pipelines are, right? So I think particularly in an industry like Hollywood, we had sort of a tradition, or Hollywood has had a tradition and a history of hiring people that you know, right? So you hire people that you know, you hire people who look like you hire people you've worked with before, right? So while I worked with you on this project, it went well, I'm going to bring you along, and I hired you the first time because I knew you or you were a friend of a friend. And so I think we really have to start thinking about our pipelines far more differently and reevaluate the qualifications that we have had in place to see whether they really are in fact a qualification for the job that we are seeking people to do. Because in many cases, they're just sort of holdovers about where we wanted somebody to go to school and not something that is truly required in order to do the job.
Absolutely. I've heard that time and time again. And Gail, you know a lot of people of color in the industry. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you have to, it's sort of like what the lawyer from Loeb and Loeb said. I mean, you have to have a real commitment behind your actions. And so more and more companies are moving beyond just merely giving the lip service into putting the ideas around inclusion into action. And so hopefully, because we all know that there have been qualified women, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and other minorities out there. It's just, where was the commitment to really bring them in a meaningful way into these companies, into these environments, and really have them seen, have their voices heard. And so perhaps we're seeing a shift right now that will be permanent.
And having people seen and heard, how do we ensure that in the workplace?
By listening, by communicating, by being open to new thoughts and ideas.
By modeling that behavior. I think we talk about doing that often, but our leaders need to model that behavior. People need to see that at all levels of the organization. If they're going to feel a sense of psychological safety, which we talk a lot about often, if they're going to feel a sense of belonging, which we talk a lot about often, it matters to see your leaders display those behaviors. And we often talk about it more than we do it.
I wanted to mention two things in response to some of what I'm hearing. And the first I want to mention is just a great example of being able to find people from all different backgrounds and staff up a team that is truly diverse. Sometimes it comes from a client. We had a major client of our firm, as many are now doing, wanting to know who is on the team for some major litigation. And the attorney who was in charge of that litigation really took to heart that he needed to build a very diverse team. And he built a diverse team of over 20 people. And it did entail hiring some new people. And so, once he did that, I think it really dispelled this idea that they're not out there, you can't find them. And they did a group picture of this team, and it was fantastic. The other thing I wanted to say about listening, sometimes people who are leading a meeting don't realize that they're favoring certain voices. And so I was in a meeting once, and the department head was giving more time to the white males in the room than the women and minorities. And I actually wrote down on a legal pad the amount of time that was being given to the white men and the amount of time that was being given to the women and minorities. And I went to the department head. This was not at my firm, by the way. I went to the department head and I said, I want to make you aware of something that I don't think you may be aware of. And I had the data. I showed him this legal pad. The next meeting, he came in with a timer. And now that was maybe a little bit over the top to come in with the timer, but at least he heard me. So I think it's calling it out, drawing attention to it, making people aware when they're favoring different voices, they're favoring the same voices over different voices.
I love that example, Ivy. And I'm reflecting back on Malia's point around, your question around diversity and the fact that we've never really questioned pipelines. We've never questioned the language that we use on recruitment. We've never questioned, to your point, Ivy, the practices that we believe that have enabled a lot of people to succeed and really excluded a lot of other people. And I think of one example, it's one of my favorites from the listening tour that we did last year, because it does happen at all levels. I think it's important for leaders to be able to do that. And Ivy, you had a voice and someone that would be willing to hear you and your data. But also there's junior people on teams that don't feel they have those voices, and that someone will support them. And when we did our listening tour last year, it was maybe our 5th or 6th one. And we would ask everyone to hold space for marginalized communities to speak first, and then to let others speak. And we had a lull in the conversation. Nobody was speaking. And so the facilitator called, I think it was a white man or a white woman, I can't remember at this point. But the point was that that person said, "Thank you so much. But if there's anything I have learned so far, is that my voice gets repeated often. And so I'm going to hold back, and I'm going to create space for others. And then I will speak." And it was that reflection and that action and that modeling in that moment that nobody, none of us told them to do this, but they did. And that created this, literally that moment of breathing in that room, and everybody started speaking and sharing their truth. And it's those moments of learning and reading a room properly. And it's kind of this rule that, that I learned recently, and I've been using it with my team. Nobody gets to speak twice unless everybody speaks once. Like creating a space so that everybody gets a voice if they want to. I'm not going to force you to speak, and then you get to speak twice. But it's creating some of those unbiasing, practices in your teams, that it's not just a sort of the draconian way of managing a team, but a way of lifting up. How do we build equity and a sense of belonging in this team so that folks can connect to what's important to them?
Ivy, the anecdote that you used was so interesting. How do we ensure that there are diverse voices in boardrooms, among the team leaders? How do we make sure that that happens? Anyone jump in.
We're all being so deferential to each other. I'll just jump in and say, I think that, as I said, in some respects, clients are demanding it. People you do business with are demanding it. People don't want to walk into rooms anymore, and not that they ever did, but walk into a room and see all white men. They also don't want to walk into a room and see all white men and women. So I think there is a push from, we were talking about brands before, brands, clients, people, and as Daisy said, people who have the power to push for it. I think there's real support for this change. We have to make these changes, and it's going to be good for business as well as just for a good, respectful work environment.
Malia, at the Hollywood Commission, what are you hearing from industry leaders?
Well, I think certainly, particularly over the last year, we've seen an increasing number of leaders really paying close attention to this issue. A big push to diversify the workforce that they're hiring, and in some ways, I think that's good and really responsive to some of what we saw on the Hollywood survey, because when we did the Hollywood survey and we looked specifically at bias, there was a marked difference in perception, for example, in terms of how much progress had been made. So for example, men overall who took the survey, 75% of them felt that there had been progress with respect to diversity and inclusion. And that was 78% of white men. And that compared with 47% of Black women who felt that progress had been made on diversity and inclusion. So clearly there has been a remarkable gap in the experiences of men and women and women and minorities compared to majority men. And I think that we have to be more responsive to that gap, because a lot of times those leaders are the ones who think they have already made a lot of progress. So we need to do a better job of listening to the voice of the worker and be responsive to that. And I think more and more leaders are hearing that and seeing that and know that they need to do better.
It's not just gender or ethnicity, it's also age. I know on my team, we have a lot of, the unconscious bias is real. You tend to unconsciously just automatically recruit, find yourself more comfortable in spaces with people who are most like you. So I own that. And when you, at one point, when you saw my organization and the people that work with me, you would mostly see men, Black and white, mostly Black, of a certain generation. What I discovered was that we were missing out on a whole entire, very, very active market, which is driven by youth. And so now I very consciously, we go to schools and we're tied into programs where we're able to come into contact with younger people who are able to broaden our perspective on things and also keep us up to date on just what is really happening out there now. And that we found that to be very, very, very successful, because I didn't know what TikTok was until until one of the young people brought it up.
We
Oh,
can
goodness.
definitely learn. We can definitely learn from people that are younger. But I have to tell you, I know I've seen so much ageism in the entertainment industry. And about 5 years ago, I started an organization called Greenlit Women, and I started it specifically for the purpose of supporting and mentoring and promoting, championing women 40 and over in the entertainment industry, because 40 is the age by law that you're considered old, which is ironic since I don't think anyone really thinks we're old at 40. And our organization has people up to, the oldest member was Marsha Nassiter, who passed away, and she was, 90, over 90 years old. So I think, I like what you said, Gil. I think it goes both ways. But I think our industry has historically not been kind to men and women as they age. And I think, we see it with Nancy Pelosi, revealing my politics here, but we see it with, we see it with Nancy Pelosi, we saw it with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We're at our best as we get older. Yes, we can definitely learn from people that are younger than us, but we just bring so much to the table. So I'm very focused on trying to really, root out and combat ageism in our business.
And Ivy, your organization does great work.
Thank you.
I love that we're having this conversation. I don't know if it was where you meant it to go, Anita, but I was actually on a panel on Monday with AARP talking about ageism. And, I work for a youth media company. And so, we're creating content by and for youth and what's next. And it's Gen Zers and millennials, which means that in our organization, I have, largest percentage of our employees are 35 and under. But we also have managers and leaders who are managing and leading for the first time in those age groups, who need the wisdom and the guidance from more seasoned leaders, if you will, and who can learn and grow a lot from our younger workforce. So I think that there's something that we tend to forget, that ageism actually impacts on both ends, right? You can either be, you can either be discriminated because you don't have enough experience, or you can be discriminated against because you have too much experience. And I think it's important that be acknowledged and discussed as part of broader diversity and inclusion initiatives in organizations, and that media, which has such a powerful opportunity to really shape perception and language and concepts and realities around this, the huge responsibility that we have in terms of the storytelling, our editorial work, our social media work. I have a 13-year-old, so I live in the land of TikTok. Our social media work, and as well as our workplace practices, and how we build teams that are cross-generational and that are respectful and thoughtful of what that means and what that looks like.
Absolutely. We have mentioned several times the death of George Floyd a year and a half ago. Gil, after that happened, there was a racial awakening in the country. Have you seen many changes in the industry, in your opinion?
I saw a reaction to a terrible situation. Have I seen change? I think people sincerely want to do their best. And that may be naive, but I do think that people are sincere about their intentions to be more welcoming and more tolerant of others. whether or not we'll actually see that happen, I mean, the jury's still out. You know, as an African-American male, you know, what happened to George Floyd, of course, was shocking, but it wasn't surprising. And to be part of the reaction, to have so many people reach out was interesting, because I mean, it's something when you put on this suit every day and live in the real world, you just sort of, I guess you just sort of harden yourself against, these attacks on your humanity, these attacks on your, at times, your very existence. And so it was welcomed, but I'm holding out to see what type of real change we're actually going to see, how we're going to see these reactions actually manifest themselves into a shift in policy. You know, a lot of these thoughts, a lot of these attitudes, a lot of these beliefs have been deeply ingrained into who we are as people, how we view ourselves, how we view others. And, you know, that type of change really, really, really takes a lot of time. So perhaps it may not even be something that those of us who are on this call will actually see bear fruit, but maybe for our children, you know, it'll be a world that they'll be able to, reap those benefits.
And turning this back to Hollywood, Ivy, what have you seen in terms of change in the past year?
So I think Daisy actually touched upon it a bit. What I have found to be very important in terms of a shift is that companies were afraid sometimes to have the conversations and to be proactive. And without, you know, I've literally had clients say to me things like, do no harm. You know, when Daisy talks about that listening tour, I do similar things. I do cultural assessments. I go into companies and I assess from top to bottom the culture. And, you know, so for so long, you know, I've heard clients say, I'm afraid to do that, or do no harm, or I'm afraid to have those conversations. And there's been this sense of we can just keep things calm and even keel if we just kind of ignore what's going on outside in the world around us. And I have seen a major shift both in the willingness to assess cultures, to do what Daisy said, to really listen all the way, all levels of your structure. And then the other thing I've seen, which I'm just so pleased by, and it's a hard thing to do, I'm seeing clients and I'm seeing, you know, my own managing partner of my law firm be willing to make a statement and come out and take a position, even though you know, as a corporation, somebody in your organization is not going to like the position you took, or even as a brand, you know that some of the consumers are not going to like the position you took. That gives me some hope, Gil, that things are changing, that, you know, that we are listening, we are assessing, and we're actually coming forward and making statements knowing some people will disagree. And I think that's so important for getting us where we need to go. And I know we have a long way to go, but those are some of the things that give me some optimism.
What role does policy play in advancing diversity and inclusion? Anyone?
Yeah.
Gonna say Malia.
I was gonna say, do we mean, you know, internal company policies, or?
I say internal company policies particularly. I mean, do we have to mandate this at the national level or the state level?
Well, no, because then it's not organic, it's not authentic. It's like what's happening, well, we're not supposed to reference current events, but it's like sort of what's happening right now with one big important story in the news, and the pushback that you're seeing when people are mandated to do something that they may not want to do. It has to be organic. It has to be part of just society's spirit of humanity, that they don't think a certain way, or you know. So mandating, I don't know. I don't think people necessarily respond well, like to be told what to do, what they must do.
I'm going to push back on
You
that.
rather want to educate them and show them the benefits of adapting to certain types of behaviors, of welcoming the value of having certain more diverse and inclusive groups of people in their circle. So they have to see how it benefits them.
Yeah, I understand.
I think so, but I'm going to push
back.
back on that if I can, because I do think that while we certainly have, it certainly has to come from a place of will to do this work. There also has to be a skill, and there has to be a push to build those skills, right? So I always say it's about skill and will. And I have to tell you that one of the first things that I did when I came to Vice, following again George Floyd's murder, and our own internal, one of our own internal brands having a very negative public experience, was create a code of conduct. So I actually had to mandate how people were going to behave with each other. I had to remind people that this is what is expected of you in the workplace, and what you should expect of us as a workplace in terms of safety and fairness and dignity. And so I do think that there has to be a combination of the two, because when there are no guardrails, when there are no guidelines, when there is no stated sense in terms of policies, and right now, Anita, I'm referencing to policies organizational. There's also obviously from regulatory sense, but from an organization lens, policy making has been a big part of the work that we've done at Vice. Understanding that we're also a youth media company that is always pushing the envelope, and that nobody wants to be told what to do, especially young people who are telling the world what not to do. So it's a balance, but I have to say that it's been so well received, particularly by underrepresented and marginalized employees in the organization, to know that there are protections for them that are very clear. And I'll give you one small example that's not necessarily a policy, but it's related to a policy. We recently started easing employees back to the offices. I use that word specifically because it's not a full return to offices, but I call it the ease back. We're easing people back into offices with a set of safety protocols and policies. And what we found was that there were some employees that were not treating our office staff very well as they were coming in. And examples of when someone was asking them for their vaccination tracker, going, why do you need to see it? When people were asking them to wear their masks, which by the way is a policy in the organization and law, pushing back. And I sent a very kind and direct note to the entire company, reminding them that fairness and respect and empathy are our core values, and that lack of civility in the workplace could be disciplined. It was that very simple sentence that I sent. And I have to tell you, the entire office staff that we have emailed me afterwards saying thank you, because no one had said that out loud to them, even though it's in our code of conduct, even though it's in our policies. But we also have to not just create the policies, we have to keep on reminding individuals, and we have to keep on modeling those behaviors. So just expecting that the will of people will get us there, unfortunately, doesn't get us there. We need a combination of the two, in my experience.
But yeah, and I think to follow up on that a little bit, I mean, listen, a policy is a part of an overall system, right? I think at the beginning, we started this conversation around creating systems and structures, not an individual tactic like a policy or an inclusion writer. Important, but those are individual tactics that have to feed into an overall system and structure that begins to address these issues in a stronger way. So, I think it's important, to Daisy's point around you as an organization certainly need to have policy, and you need to set forth your expectations through a code of conduct or a similar document, and then you need to reinforce it. I think one other thing we can do a better job at is creating public accountability for progress, right? So one thing that I don't think we've done a great job of yet is saying, here's our code of conduct, here are our values. We are going to evaluate and measure where our culture is, where our climate is, and we are going to make that available on an ongoing basis to our community, to let them know how we're doing, because I think there are fewer things that are stronger and more incentivizing than being transparent about these issues and the progress you are making and the progress you're not making. And I think that also helps to build trust within your worker base.
Malia, it's so funny that are coincidental. So I think in little diagrams. And as we've been talking, what I was writing was what I've said all along: all the best policies don't work if you don't have a good culture. So I started with policies, and then I went down to culture. And then the very next thing, if you could see it, the very next thing, and you hit it beautifully, is accountability. So, yes, I agree with Daisy, and I agree with you. You have to have policies as part of your process and your structure, but it doesn't matter if you don't have a good culture. And you just really hit the last probably really important aspect of all of this is holding people accountable, holding companies accountable. And, accountability can be negative and positive. It can be, Daisy was mentioning a disciplinary action. It can also be, you actually get incentives. You have a team that's really diverse, you're going to get a bigger bonus. You're going to get a higher back end. And it may sound crass to talk that way and make it a money issue, but money sometimes talks to people. And so if that's an incentive that will have people perform better, holding them accountable in a positive way, I think is also almost as good as the negative side of it. So I'm so glad you hit that issue.
Ivy, we actually created a set of behavioral expectations this year. Instead of just the standard values that every company has, we wanted to be very explicit of these are the behavioral expectations that we have of you and that you should have of us as well. And for those who are bonus eligible, there's actually a percentage of your bonus that's tied to performing against those behavioral principles. So to your point, I was like, money always talks, right? There's a reason why we incentivize individuals with money and other elements. And that's one of the pieces that we added. So equationally on your bonus, now before it was, personal behavior, and it was kind of this nebulous thing of like, yeah, I just showed up to work, so I get that part. It's like, no, it's you met these criteria based on these 5 behavioral principles that are, Malia, to your point around accountability, we actually post them on our website. We post them on our performance reviews. We post them in our bonus notes. And it's something that is now tied to everything that is expected in the organization. So it's very clear from an accountability perspective. I love that.
So what advice would you give to a smaller company that doesn't have the resources to give these incentive bonuses or to implement some of these changes? Daisy?
It's actually not that expensive. So it doesn't have to be a form. I'm saying, not all of our employees are bonus eligible. So, but those are still the same behavioral expectations that are expected of all of our employees. And so, it is, and Ivy was talking about it, it is part of our culture. It is how we think of incentivizing employees in small ways through a small spot bonus or a lunch and learn with teams. It is how we reward and incentivize behavior that is in parallel with who we say we are, right? A lot of organizations have a gap between who they say they are and how employees experience the workplace. And the way to incentivize that gap to be reduced is by actually ensuring that the acts that are happening, not the toxic behavior doesn't get rewarded, but the good behavior gets rewarded. The good behavior gets called out. I mean, our CEO, Nancy, will send a note to any level employee whenever anything happens in the organization that we want to recognize. And I pick up those stories all the time and share them with her. And I have to tell you, it's not money, but getting a note from your CEO saying thank you for upholding our values and for doing this great job, it lights up their day, and it's worthwhile. And so there are a lot of big and small ways that we can do it. And sometimes we think that it's got to be this grand act when it's just a simple gesture of saying thank you and of feeling recognized, seen, and valued that carries so much more weight.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Gil, can you talk to me a little bit about what AFCA has done to promote inclusion among film critics? Because there was a time when we heard almost all film critics were white males.
Well, we put these ideas into motion, I think, in a very real way. We partner with a lot of different organizations, from the Gina Davis Institute to NALEAT to CAPE to GLAD, to ensure that the programming that we create responds to every segment of the community. We also have an offshoot organization called Kaleidoscope, which, just as the name implies, represents a group of journalists from various backgrounds, you know, Black, Asian, Hispanic, white. So, you know, in creating programming and collaborating with organizations that share our core values is a way in which we, you know, we hope to contribute to the change that we're speaking to today. You know, and if you've ever been to any of our tentpole events, our award shows, you'll see that they have long been, you know, populated by diverse, you know, diversity from the presenters to the actual, you know, recipients of the award. So it's not something that we talk about, it's just simply something that we do. And I think it mirrors a belief system where as people of color, we recognize that the value of diverse voices, the voices, like I said earlier, today that populate the entire globe and not just one particular part of it.
Absolutely. And what you said ties into what Ivy said about the client who wanted more diverse voices, correct?
Absolutely. Totally. I mean, I think that's what people want to see. People want to see reflections of themselves, of who they are. They want to see, you know, when you live in a diverse city like Los Angeles, you know, you want to, that's an expectation that you have, is to see the diversity that we all know and experience each day, you know, in every possible environment. You know, I mean, it's just what makes sense, I believe.
Absolutely.
And our organization is small enough where we can implement. We have probably a lot more flexibility than someone, you know, like at Ivy's company, which is a lot larger. You know, there are only 6 people that work here full time, so you know it's a lot easier to change and to adapt to different differences when it's a smaller group.
It took us a long time. I'll be, you know, I'll be honest about that. It took us longer because we are bigger. We've got offices all over the country, and in fact, some offices outside the country. But I'm just really proud of the progress we made because there was a commitment to it. And there was a commitment to it not only because of clients and because of the financial incentives, there was a commitment to it because people that work here want this to be a really good, respectful, inclusive culture. So I'm really happy to say we have a much more diverse board of partners. We have much more diversity running different offices, running different departments. I'm the co-chair actually of our partnership candidacy committee, and we are the committee that works with the different departments to put people up for a vote for partnership. And I and my co-chair, an African-American man, Channing Johnson, we are very focused on making sure that the classes coming up for partnership are diverse. And I think we've come a long way, but it really took that commitment. It took a group of people within the organization to be committed to doing the hard work. And, you know, we've been doing it for a long time, and now we're really seeing the change.
What are some other initiatives? We heard a lot about Vice, but what are some other successful initiatives over the past few years? Malia?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in. I know a lot of people are doing a lot of really interesting work, and you know, within the Hollywood Commission, you know, again, when we did the Hollywood survey, we really sought a lot of feedback about what workers were looking for and what would be beneficial to them and what would they really be looking for. And so Yasmin Dunn, our wonderful director of education and outreach, has done some tremendous work, particularly on the education side, and is working, you know, to your earlier question about how can we work with smaller companies, right? So really developing some specific resources tailored to both entertainment and those in independent or smaller production companies that, you know, do 2 things. So one, we've been looking a lot at bystander intervention training and really tailoring that to this specific culture, because a lot of what we heard is, I don't know what to do when I see this behavior, right? So how can I do better? How can I speak up, step in, intervene, you know, sort of deflect whatever the situation might call for when I'm seeing these behaviors? And so trying to get better tools to people who just aren't quite sure what to do in the moment, or, you know, within the organization, to uphold the values that people talk about within their company, I think has been really important. And really important because, you know, the other thing we know about training and education is you really have to make it specific to your audience so that they do see themselves in it. They see the scenarios speak to them. And so they can really have these tools that are so specific to what they do and what they see on a day-to-day basis. And I think concurrently with that, really developing a training around sexual harassment, for example, that yes, is compliant with what the law requires of you, and also speaks to not just don't do this, but do this, right? Like, how do we create an inclusive on-set production environment where we all begin to recognize the biases that we all have, and then nonetheless do some better independent decision-making, knowing that we have those. So I think those are important ways to begin rethinking about how we train and educate to these issues while still meeting the legal floor.
And you know what's interesting about where I've seen a big shift in trainings, because I do a lot of trainings, is we used to train on what was illegal, right? So along the lines of what Malia's saying, the training was all about you can't do these things because they're illegal. And my trainings have changed so much, as have others who do this work, because we're focused on really making it clear to the people that attend these trainees, it's not just about what's illegal, it's about what's inappropriate. So you might not cross the line in a way that's going to subject you or the company to a lawsuit, but your behavior is making someone uncomfortable. And particularly, you know, if it's making someone who is a person of color, a person who is LGBTQ, et cetera, you know, it goes to a whole different level. So I think that's a really good point, Malia. I think that that's another place I've seen a shift in our industry, a shift towards very personalized training and an appreciation for training on what is inappropriate, and also a recognition that you might not think your behavior is inappropriate, but if the other person does, if they're uncomfortable, not having that knee-jerk reaction and taking it to heart, you've made that person uncomfortable and not wanting to do that. The other big change in our industry too, I think, is really a focus on bullying. And, you know, for many, many years, we tried to desensitize people. Look, you want to work in the entertainment industry, it's a rough place to work. You got to have tough skin. You got to let things roll down your back. And we now take bullying very seriously, and people get individual coaching if they're bullying. And again, sometimes we see the bullying really does affect women, people of color, LGBTQ. And so we're trying to also root that out of our industry.
So what do you do when you see something you perceive as inappropriate? Do you confront the person? Do you go to your supervisor? What's the best approach?
Go ahead, Daisy.
No, I was looking at you, Malia.
Okay,
I love plugging the work that Malia and the Hollywood Commission does, because it's providing that level of accountability and clarity and great resources and tools. So this is all I refer people to. I refer my own.
I was gonna say Yasmin's not on this particular panel, but you know, listen, I think that what we try to focus on is understanding your own barriers to speaking up in a particular situation. And really, it's going to depend on the situation, right? In some cases, it may be that in the moment, given the power dynamic, it is not appropriate to speak up in the moment. That could be very risky to you or to the person who is being targeted. And so that can be really problematic. And then, you know, the tactic is to deflect or to try and move the conversation in a different way and follow up and really, you know, ultimately go to a supervisor. But it's going to depend a lot on the situation and the circumstances to decide what the appropriate thing is in the moment. But, you know, depending on your power, you can step in and you know, if somebody keeps getting interrupted, you can step in and make space for them. If you have power in that situation, you can speak up and sort of voice your own values and position. You can interrupt bad jokes, right? Right, sort of these jokes that continue to perpetuate stereotypes and state your position about it's not funny and I don't really care who told that joke, right? But it does depend on the power and the danger in that situation and evaluating those risks and understanding your own barriers.
I think, Anita, if I may, I wanted to answer your last question too, because there's two things in particular that I'm optimistic about for our industry and for all industries, quite frankly, but is the NASDAQ disclosure for boards is it's a huge initiative that will be, I mean, there's a lot of other, California has had a long ruling against it, but I do think that we're starting to see teeth being put into the assessment of diversity composition for boards and for other organizations that's making it far more transparent. And so I'm very optimistic about that. And I'm also optimistic about the inclusion standards that studios like Disney and others have put in place to ensure that for productions, for those areas where I think the Hollywood Commission has been just so instrumental, those areas that have been like the last ones that people think about when building diversity and inclusion, right? Everyone's built it for the institutions, but you're forgetting about the workers are the least protected and the least thought of. And these inclusion standards are forcing organizations to think about a workforce that they don't think about often and to think about it from an inclusion and belonging and diversity perspective and their requirements. So I guess going back to the policy question earlier, there are requirements that are being set, but they're also their accountability measures and their transparency measures that are really important. And so while we won't see change overnight, the fact that these measures are in place and that they will be carried on gives me a lot of hope for our industry.
Absolutely. Gil, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, no, Disney, I was listening to Daisy and she mentioned Disney, and I'm actually on the commission there. They put a sizable investment, not only, from the standpoint of, their employees and workplace, but also their content. And I'm part of an advisory committee that reviews the content from their entire catalog, which is massive. And they've put together, they've reached out to organizations that just about represent every possible configuration of a human being imaginable, to be an active part of that discussion, and so others are doing it as well. Warner Media Group is certainly moving in that direction. So, people are moving in the right direction, like Ivy mentioned earlier. Are we going to see something tomorrow, perhaps? Not likely, but will we get there eventually? I certainly hope so.
It's interesting, Gil, when you were talking about content, because over the last couple of years, I've had 3 situations that I've dealt with that are all completely different. And I can't go into details, obviously, because they're clients, but what I can tell you is they were all completely different scenarios, but all involve content and issues about people feeling like the content was not sensitive, whether it wasn't racially sensitive or it wasn't sensitive enough in terms of LGBTQ or whatever the issue might be. And it led to some really important discussions about who's creating the content and who is approving the content, who's developing it, who's creating it, who's greenlighting it, and a real sense that there needs to be people in the room that actually have personal experience with the subject matter so that they can bring authenticity and sensitivity to it. So I've had 3 of those that were pretty significant situations that I needed to handle for 3 completely different clients and 3 completely different forms of content.
Fascinating. Well, we are running out of time. This has certainly been a lively and informative conversation. I want to thank all of you panelists for taking part, and thank you to our audience for watching, and please enjoy the rest of the Power Women Summit.
Thank you everyone for joining us for Power Women Summit 2021. I hope you had as much fun as I did.